Oh, now you can hear me. I had my volume off. Hi, Tennille. Hi, little Lousy. So glad you're here. How are you guys? Hmm? I'm doing really well, Lousy. Physically, I'm doing really well. Mentally, I'm trying to catch up. I don't know. This adjusting to the new stomach, new eating patterns is taking a bit for me, but I'm doing good. Hi, Voon. How are you? So glad you guys are here. That's so nice. So, okay, I've got our questions loaded and ready to go. Oops, wait. Yeah. Um, so everybody else is doing good? Yeah? I hope so. Foon's good. That's good. Lousy, you're doing good too? I sure hope so. That'd be great. So we'll see if maybe after a while Deb joins us or Kate from England. We'll see. Okay. That's a question from last week. Got it. Okay, good. Present, but buffering as usual, Tennille. Well, hopefully not too much longer. If they're working on your YouTube, I'm glad you made it this week too, Voon. That's so nice that you're here with us. But you were busy last week, I think, with some of your gardening supplies or some of your gardening produce, I should say, right? I think that's what you were up to. Yeah. Okay, so I'll put the first question up. We can chat about other things if you like, or if we can get into it right away. So the first question that Tennille has for us this week is, why do you think Nell would go visit Sula when she was ill? So when Sula was really sick, why was Nell going to visit her after everything that happened, after more time had passed? What was that about? What was Nell hoping to accomplish, or why did she feel the need to go there? What do you guys think? Boone said she started canning too late. I got done early today. Now that's a big job, eh? Especially you have a lot to can. Kate sends her apologies. She can't make it tonight. Okay, well, we'll miss her, but we'll see her hopefully next week. Yeah, I remember, Voon, when I was younger, my parents, we kept like what do you call that? I know the old houses in the countries, they had sort of like a cold shelter that was sort of like built into the ground underneath the old houses. So we had a modern house, but we had sort of like a cold storage room. I can't think of the word for it, for vegetables to overwinter them. And we kept all sorts of stuff in there. And my parents didn't do so much canning. We did a lot of, or do you call it canning when you've got the mason jars and the lids on top, and those are boiled like to preserve things in them? My parents were big on making pickles. We didn't eat that many pickles, but my parents gave them to all of their friends along with all of the jams that were made. So that was always nice. Okay, Voon's getting down to business for us. Okay, so the question, why do you think Nell would go visit Sula when she was ill? And Voon says over here that I think Nell can't help visit Sula. I think she just needs to find out why she hurt her. She wants to know, I guess Nell wants to know, why did Sula sleep with Jude and hurt her that way, right? She needed to visit her. There was too much history not to. Hey, Deb's here. Hi, Deb. How are you? Hope everything is going well with you. Neil says, I like Deb's answer that Nell was actually a decent person and was going to see about her friend. Yeah. Deb, we're just looking at the first question from Tennille, where she says, why do you think Nell would go visit Sula when Sula was ill? So, Voon had said, where are we here? She said, I think Nell can't help but visit Sula. I feel like she just needs to find out why Sula hurt her, sleeping with Jude. She needed to visit her. There was just too much history not to. Tennille said that she likes your answer, Deb, that Nell was actually a decent person and was just going to see about her friend. Little Aussie says, I think she felt obliged to visit her. Yeah, they had been friends for such a very long time now. And when our friends God forbid, if we ever experience that, get so ill that they're sort of like at death's door, a decent thing to do is kind of try to let bygones be bygones, or at least not mention them and go and show them some respect and check in on them, I guess. Tennille says, Deb, I'm glad you're here. I was just quoting you. Deb says, everything's great. I'm really glad to hear that. That's really good. Foon says she also thinks that Nell was a decent person. I think so too. I think she had a big heart. She had been very, very hurt, but she was decent above everything else. And Deb says, yep, I think she was a true friend in her heart, and she really needed to visit Sula and see how she was. Yeah, she's a good soul, I think. And Foon says, no one could care less about Sula except for Nell. Yeah, that's very true. Nell stuck by her, no matter what, and she was always there. And yes, they did have, something very hurtful take place, and Nell was very upset. And we know from what's going on in the chapter, she's still very upset, right? About how Sula had slept with her husband. But at the end of the day, they had been friends for such a very, very long time. And she still has, like everybody here is saying, especially Deb, right? Nell has a really good heart, and she still cares. Tennille says, I think Nell needed some closure too. I think she wanted an answer from Sula as to why she took Jude. And Voon says, oh, good point, Tennille. Yeah, like, why did she have to sleep with Nell's husband? I mean, we know that Sula goes for what Sula wants to do. She goes after what she likes. But you would have thought that with them being very, very close friends, that she would have said, okay, hands off. This is Nell's husband. But she certainly saw things differently. So Tennille asks next, what do you think Nell means by the cumbersome bare love she feels for her children? Right? At one point, I think after Jude leaves, Tennille was explaining in the video, Nell comes to call or feel that the love she has for her children is like a cumbersome bare love, which is one of caretaking and watching over and providing for the children. So what do you think she means by that? That she feels for her children this cumbersome bare love. Yeah, Tennille points out that Sula had no real answers for Nell when Nell wanted to find out why she had slept with her husband. Because inadvertently or directly, she contributed directly to causing the breakup of Nell's marriage, right? Certainly Jude had his role in it, and I see him as primarily responsible, although considering that Sula was her best friend, what on earth was she doing? So, anybody have thoughts about what Nell means by the cumbersome bare love she feels for her children? It's true, no? Like if we take a look at like bears out in the wild, you have animals that mate, and then after mating season is over, or even before they part, right? They each go their own way, and the female of the species has the children and cares for them, provides for them, protects them, and raises them, and the male is off on his own, right? And I wonder if that's partly why there's this comparison to bear love, because Nell feels like she's doing her duty. She's doing what is biologically required of her to provide for and care for her offspring. But the love and the sense of it being a family is now quashed by the fact that Jude has slept with her best friend and he's left. Boone says, I think Nell knows it is going to be hard to take care of her children, but you can tell that she loves them and is going to do what is necessary. Deb says, I just felt she was taking on the responsibility of taking care of her children after her husband left. And Tennille shares that, I think it implies that Nell had become dangerously so codependent on her children after Jude left, and she realized this. Okay, there are certainly a lot of people do that. Even in marriages, right, where the partners are staying married, but where the husband and wife, I'm talking about traditional marriage here, pull apart for whatever reason. Oftentimes, one of the parents, and it's usually much more likely the female of the two will sort of like transfer some of that bonding and that love to the children, right? Appropriately or not. Deb's Way says maybe cumbersome because she took on the task all by herself, but she loved her children. Yeah, she loved her children, but now she wasn't just only going to be taking care of the home and, making the food, cleaning the house, let's say, mending their clothing. Now she had to do all of that while at the same time providing for them financially and watching them at all times because she didn't have anybody to split those responsibilities with. Very good. So, why did Sula think her death was more important or more grand than others? Dying, as she said, like a redwood instead of like a stone. Why did Dula think? So, I don't know where my words are tonight. I'm sorry. Why did Sula think her death was so important and so grand, making it akin to a redwood passing as opposed to just the dying of an old tree stump? And Neil, answering the question before, says, Neil reined in her love for her children because she knew it was unhealthy to smother her children with love. Okay, yeah, I hear that. That's a very good point. That she realized that she didn't want to transfer too many inappropriate feelings towards her children, placing too much of a reliance of that bonding of love on them. So she thought, I'm going to care for them like a bear protects and deeply provides for, and that way loves her offspring. Okay, I hear that. So again, for question 3, why did Sula think her death was more grand and more important than that of others, where she compares herself to dying like a redwood instead of an old tree stump? So what's that about? What do you guys think there? Neil says, all of Nell's focus and her desperate need for reciprocated love turned towards her children. Yeah, Nell was very much on her own at that point, wasn't she? I mean, here the relationship with her best friend had fallen apart. They weren't side by side, whether physically or emotionally anymore, and now her husband's gone out of the picture. And who does Nell have, really, right? She's on her own with her kids. Foon says, I think Sula was a very selfish person. I think the only grand thing about Sula passing is that the people were happy of it. They wanted her gone. Wow. Thanks. That's quite something, no? I think Sula was a very selfish person. I think the only grand thing about her passing is that the people were happy of it. They wanted her gone. Neil says, that was my take on the bear love thing anyway. Yeah, I think it's a very good insight, Neil, as always. I think you share many interesting points, and I think you have insight into that. Yeah. Foon says, I don't quite get why Sula thinks her own death is grand. Yeah. That could be part of her narcissistic bent, no? Thinking that everything about her, everything she's interested in, everything she does is somehow important, impressive, terrific, grand. Deb says, Sula had superior thoughts of herself. She was grand, old redwood in her own mind. And it seems like only in her own mind, no? And Tennille says she agrees with Foon because Sula didn't give a damn about anyone except for Sula. And Foon shares, very, very sad too. Indeed, yes. There's a lot of sadness in this book, isn't there? In so many different ways. Really talks and shows and highlights a lot of the different tragedies that can take place in life, in friendships, in relationships between grandparents and grandchildren, parents and their own children, friends, lovers. Tennille says, yes, Deb, I agree. It's like she is the only real person in the world to her anyway. She's certainly the only person that matters to her. right? Everybody else is secondary as long as she's meeting her own needs and wants first. Boone says, why would Sula want to be so very alone or want to be that way? Yeah, that's a very good question. I'm wondering about that. I think some people who are very, very prideful do not want others to see them when they are vulnerable or weak. I think that's why she wants to be alone now. I'm not sure why she had wanted to be alone throughout her life. I'm not sure. Maybe she never wanted to be burdened with having to even act like she was caring for somebody else. She never wanted to meet anybody else's needs unless they happened to be in tune with hers. And Deb shares, we see that as very sad, but Sula lived her life her way. That's very true. Yeah, and I think that's going to pertain to a question that's coming up in a little bit, maybe. Tennille says, no one ever reached out to her at all, but Nell and Ajax. Those were the only two who reached out to Sula and made a little bit more of a connection with her. So, how does this situation seem to Sula? What does she feel? And do you think she's being bravado and trying to be brave, or is she being upfront with Nell? So how does Sula see the situation that she's in? I mean, here she is at death's door. She's extremely ill, and here comes Nell to visit her, to ask if there's anything she can do, to inquire how she's feeling. So from Sula's perspective, how is she viewing all of this, and what does she feel about this? And is she trying to be putting on a brave front and just give like automatic responses? Is she being upfront with Nell? What do you guys think? Tennille says, okay, I've got to say it. Sula, just crazy, y'all. I love that, y'all. I wish I could hear you say that right now in person. It would be so sweet. I'm curious, Tennille, to you, do I have an accent? I'm really curious about that. Because to my ear, right, when I'm listening to you, you have a little bit of that southern accent. That southern accent, whatever that means. I'm just wondering, do I sound like I have an accent to you, being Canadian, speaking English differently than most Americans? I don't know. Deb says, lol, Tennille. Coming right out and saying it, Sula was nuts. Green says, I think Sula is thinking, Nell is the one person that gets me for me. She let me down by not getting over her sleeping with Jude. She let me down by not getting over her, Sula sleeping with Jude. And Sula knows that she doesn't. I'm not clear on that one. Hold on. Sula knows that she doesn't, love Jude. And in her own way of thinking, she is thinking Nell should know that. But it's interesting. She might think Nell should know that, but it's also, very, very presumptive on her part to think, you know what? Nell should be okay with it that I just went ahead and slept with her husband. We shared things before. Whether they shared combs or brushes or outfits. Sula seems to equate everything on the same level, including Nell's husband, right? It's very interesting that you would think that Nell should be kind of chill with that and be all right with it. So, again, you guys, we've heard from a couple. What do you think? So, how does this situation seem to Sula? What does she seem to be feeling over here? Is she being upfront with Nell? Is she not? Is she putting on a brave face? What do you think? Boone says, yep. Oops. I went too fast. In her crazy mind, she's not even thinking that she is hurting her friend. No, she doesn't even seem to be aware of that, right? In Deb's way, yeah, it didn't mean anything when Sula fooled around with Jude. It was just something she wanted to do. Right. And what Sula wants, Sula does, and doesn't really consider what the ramifications may be outside of her immediate desire and need, right? Very, very self-centered and self-focused, selfish, not considering others. She almost seemed surprised, right, that Neil was so upset. Neil says, "Oh yes, Aaliyah, you have an accent to me." Lol, I love the Yiddish too. Oh, am I throwing Yiddish in here sometimes? Goodness. I thought I was speaking English. It could be. All right, I'm putting numbers by the questions and I'm forgetting to remember what question I'm on. Let me find it. I'm so sorry. Okay, so we were talking about how did the situation seem to Sula? Okay, then the next question. What do you think over the course of her life was most important to Sula? I remember Tennille spent a bit of time talking about this in her video. She had some really good insights. So what do you guys think over the course of Sula's life was the most important thing to her? Boone says exactly. Okay. Deb's way. I think Sula knew she was dying and she couldn't fight it. Yeah. Deb said the most important to Sula, the family home. You think that's what was most important to her throughout her life? It's the family home. That's why she came back and kind of like grabbed it away from Eva. Boone says, I think the most important thing to Sula was Sula. Yeah. Yeah, and when I was considering that, when I heard the question in Tennille's video, and I heard Tennille's comments about it, I think really, too, what was very important to Sula was that Sula didn't put on any airs in the sense that she never tried to mold herself to be what others expected her to be. She was, who she wanted to be, and that was it. Just that she caused, devastating results sometimes, but she was who she was. She never compromised what she wanted to do, who she wanted to be to suit anybody. Boone said she wanted to do everything she wanted and she didn't care about anything or anyone else. Deb says that the way she came back to town kicked everyone out just about and lived there by herself pretty much. But that shows us that what was really important to Sula was the family home. Little Elsie says, I agree with you, Boone. She only cared about herself. Deb says, true, she cared about herself most of all, very self-centered. So going back a little bit to the reason why we think Nell came to actually see Sula. I mean, she's got her decent heart and she wants to inquire about this person who's had been her best friend for the longest time. But she also wants to find out, right, if she can, before Sula's gone, what was going on with Sula sleeping with her husband. So what do you think Sula means by saying Jude just filled up some space? Danielle says, I think part of the reason she took the house is because she could. I think Sula did a lot of things because she thought she could get away with it. Yeah, she kind of tested everything regularly, didn't she, just to see if anybody would put a stop to her behavior. And Boone says, absolutely, Tennille. So just go back to that question. Excuse me. What do you think Sula means by saying that Jude just filled up some space? I mean, that's kind of a terrible thing to say, too. You're telling your best friend that, hey, I slept with your husband because, and you don't even say because he filled, an empty place in my heart and soul and I shouldn't have done it, whatever. No, she said, he just filled up some space. Her marriage is completely over. All trust is gone. There's disloyalty there and betrayal. And it was just because Jude filled up some space for a tiny little bit of time for Sula. And that was enough to risk everything. Neil says, yeah, it's that Sula came back because she could take over and live in the house rent-free. And Boone says, I think Jude was just someone for her to be with until she got tired of him or moved on to the next person. Excuse me. A terrible thing to do to your friend, huh? So, how do you think Nell and Sula's conversation about Jude changed the way that Nell looked at Sula? How does Nell, after this conversation with Sula, see her friend? See her friend at this point in time. She hears Sula's explanations, how she lives her life, why she slept with Jude just to fill up that space. So, how do you think this changed how Nell perceives Sula at this point? Maybe Nell went there hoping that after some time, Sula's pride would have perhaps diminished a little bit, and maybe she would have felt some sorrow at the circumstances that had brought about the demise of Nell's marriage. It's certainly right if Nell went for that, looking and hoping that she would get some sort of sympathy or shame or apology from Sula. She was very sadly mistaken, right? So after this conversation, how do you think Nell now perceives Sula? Neil says, exactly, Voon. Do y'all think that Sula would have slept with Jude if he had not been Nell's husband? Well, that's a very interesting question, right? So the fact that she was Nell's husband made him perhaps more tempting, more attractive to her to sleep with him. And I don't mean physically attractive, just the thought of sharing, taking something that was Nell's made that more attractive. Foon says Nell could see why no one wanted to be settled with Sula. And Foon says, oh, I think she would have, Tennille. And she's answering Tennille now where Tennille says, do we think Sula would have slept with Jude if he had not been Nell's husband? So Foon is saying, yeah, she thinks she would have that Sula would have slept with Jude no matter what, whether he was the husband or not. Okay. Deb or Lil Aussie, do you guys have anything you want to share about that? How you think Nell now perceives Sula after the fact? I think it's been a very, very long and hard road for Nell to get to the point where she can see Sula as Sula really is, maybe, right? Somebody who is so self-absorbed, she really does not, perhaps even cannot, empathize with others and what they're going through and their feelings. And Deb shares, I think that Jude was just there. So he was convenient, he was at hand, he was ready, willing, able, and voila, there we go. Deb says, I think that Nell now realizes what Sula is all about. Yeah, the Sula is about Sula and about nobody else. If her interests happen to have coincided with Nell, well, that was perfect, right? But if they didn't, that didn't mean that Sula was going to accommodate whatever Nell wanted. It meant that Nell would have to bend and accommodate Sula's desires. Neil says, yeah, you're right. She didn't care either way. In fact, I don't think it even crossed Sula's mind that Jude belonged to Nell. Sula didn't understand belonging. Voon says, I feel sorry for Nell. Yeah, no, I mean, really, the betrayal of her friend, the betrayal of her husband, and to then even realize that your friend is incapable of feeling any sorrow or regret or sympathy because they are just so self-absorbed. They're not even really there with you. They're there to the extent that you can join in something they're interested in and meet their needs, but outside of that, you're nothing. Deb says, who knows? Could be that Jude was fooling around on the side before Sula. Could very well be. I mean, to me, the fact that he knew that that Sula and Nell had been best friends for a very long time. He didn't even know if they were going to continue on being best friends now that Sula was back. I mean, goodness, right? And who does that? He's sleeping with his wife's best friend. If he has to sleep with somebody, and he doesn't have to, obviously, but if he chooses to do that, you think he would have cared enough, right, to be a little bit more discreet and choose somebody who isn't known to or close with Nell at all. So he didn't even care really about her feelings at all. Moon says, such a sad way to be. Yeah. And Tennille says, yes, she sympathizes with Nell too. I mean, another sip of water. Maybe this will go a little bit better. I don't know. Okay. So continuing on the thread of the conversation, why do you think Sula was so harsh with Nell? Not mincing her words or pulling any punches. She was very blunt, very direct with her answers. I mean, again, this is part, right, of Sula's personality. She doesn't care if what she says is going to be hurtful. Firstly, I'm not even sure if she's aware of how hurtful what she's saying can be to anybody other than to another personality like herself. She certainly has demonstrated throughout this entire development of the story that she doesn't concern herself with other people think and feel. So why do we think she was so harsh with Nell? I don't know. Did Sula think she was being harsh, or was she just being truthful in her mind? Was she just sharing what the facts were with Nell, and she didn't think she was being harsh? She was just laying it all out there. It sounded very harsh to Nell. It sounds harsh to our ears, but probably to Sula, hey, this is the way it is. I don't know. What do you guys think? Deb says she doesn't care if what she says is hurtful to anyone. Right, right? I mean, not only does she not care about how she talks and if her words are hurtful, she didn't care that her behaviors and actions were hurtful either, right? I mean, there's no limit to what she's going to do to satisfy what it is that she wants and she needs. And she's never going to consider another person, whether it is being careful with her words or who she's around, her behaviors. Boone says, I think Sula was so harsh with Nell because Nell was supposed to understand how she really was. But in Sula's eyes, Nell ended up being just like everyone else and how and what they thought of her. Okay, so you're saying, I think what Boone you're saying here, right, is that Sula, in a sense, if it's possible for her, she's sort of like disappointed that, hey, Nell, you're supposed to see me for who I am, right? You're supposed to love me and accept me for who I am. And instead of Nell understanding how she really was, Nell ends up being just like everybody else, judging her and not caring for her behaviors. Tennille says, I think Sula is being honest and hell with what anybody thinks about her truth. And Tennille says, exactly, Voon. And Voon is saying, yes, Tennille, you're right. She doesn't care about what anybody thinks. It's her truth. That's it. Take it or leave it. You don't have to like it. Essie or Deb, if you've got anything to share. I'm going to put up the next question, but if you want, we'll just go back again, okay? So, what do you think of Sula suggesting that she was good and implying that Nell was bad? Right? That parting question that Sula asks of Nell. Nell is turning her back and she's saying to Sula, I don't think I'm going to be visiting you again after this. So Sula calls out to her, right, and says, hang on a second, not in those words, right? But Nell, have you ever thought maybe I'm the good one and maybe you're not, right? And Deb says, delusions of grandeur. Mm-hmm. Which ties in once again to a narcissistic personality, right? Which whether she is directly or she's very close to being. Deb says, lol, she thought she wasn't doing anything wrong. Mm. I knew one very narcissistic person in my life, and she was awful. The most hurtful things she would say. And one of the most hurtful things she'd said was soon after my mother passed away, and she didn't even realize, or perhaps she did, and she was being exceptionally hurtful, but I think she wasn't even aware of how what she said sounded so horrific. But they're quite something. I wonder, going back to Neil's questions here, what do you think of Sula suggesting she was good and implying Nell was bad? I mean, can you imagine Nell at this point, right? She is walking out on who had been her best friend. This woman is going to be dying now. Sula's passing away. She lost her husband. Her marriage fell apart because of this friend of hers. And yet, here is Sula getting the last word again. And with what? Not a loving statement, not gratitude that they had been friends for so long, not that they had shared so much, but instead pointing out, you know what? You think you're so good. You think you're wonderful. You know what? What if the tables have turned and I'm the good one and you're not? These should be the last words Nell should hear from her. It's just wow. No? Neil says, yep, Sula crazy. She is totally the bad one. And Sula thinks the rest of the world is crazy. Deb says maybe she was actually trying to hurt Nell. Yeah, I think so. I have the same sort of take on that, Deb. Yeah. And I think she really wanted to get the last word in. She didn't want Nell to have any satisfaction walking out of there saying, you know what, I don't think I'll be coming back. I think this is the last bit. Nell had already turned her back, but she wasn't going to let her off that easily. She had to have something to say. Boone says Sula couldn't even apologize. No. And if she had, she wouldn't have been true to herself, right? And I mean, for my take, I think that's one of the most important things for Sula was that Sula was Sula, and she wasn't going to change her personality or develop her character to suit anybody. She was going to be who she was, and that was it. So of course she wasn't going to apologize. She hadn't done anything wrong in her eyes, right? What a lousy thing to say to somebody. But I mean, certainly there have been many instances of her lousy behavior and lousy things to say. I mean, just saying that Jude was just filling up some space, implying that he didn't even have any significance, no significance at all. Tremendously significant, important to Nell. But hey, Nell, you know what? To me, nothing. Tennille says, but Boone considered that Sula was most concerned with her mind. She even refers to having her mind, and that's all that matters. Maybe she was preoccupied with her own mind because she was mad. Yeah, that could be. Yeah, and Boone says, yeah, I see that for sure, Tennille. And then here's another really interesting question. I'd like Tennille's take on this very much in her video. Tennille asks us, what do you think Sula means by the statement, when they were two throats and one eye and they had no price? I remember Tennille, and if I mix this up here, Tennille, even if you're buffing, you come back and correct me, okay? But I remember Tennille saying that when they were two throats, they had two voices. They were their own selves, but they were so close that they had only one eye, as it were, that they saw things in the same light, they interpreted things the same way, and that they had no price, that there was nothing that could possibly come between the two of them. It's a very interesting statement, no? So what do you think Sula means by this statement when she says it? Boone says, I don't know what that meant. Yeah, I wasn't sure either. That's why I really liked what Tennille had to say. You didn't understand what that meant. Yeah, I didn't either at first. It was only after I heard Tennille's take on it that I had a better understanding and appreciation of it. Yeah, especially the one eye part where they saw and interpreted everything so similarly, right? They were seeing the world the same way. A little outsy. Me either. Yeah. Yeah, that was a very confusing. Well, I think the next question Neil asks is going to have another very interesting story in it. And quite frankly, I didn't quite get that one either. Deb says, I like Tennille's thoughts about that. I took it to be that they were such close friends, is all. Yeah. So now, this is what I find really interesting. I had a bit of a hard time with this one. What is your impression of Sula's dream of the baking powder lady? And why did the boarded window give Sula peace and comfort? Now, to me, this dream which has the woman like with all the baking powder around, and she's sort of like poofing into non-existence. I wasn't quite sure what that was. I mean, Sula's death is coming up, right? So maybe she's thinking from dust to dust, and perhaps in her mind she's equating dust with that kind of feel and look of the baking powder if you were to throw it up in the air, with that silky smooth feel to it, such that if you tried to grab onto it and you couldn't, if you were still trying to hold on to life and you're slipping your way, there was nothing there that you could actually hold on to. And I found that really kind of confusing, the baking powder reference. And Tia says, I love the way Toni Morrison writes. I got a feeling from that phrase of friendship so deep, they were like two joined together. Yeah, she's a terrific writer. And Boone says, okay, this one I didn't get either. You mean, I think you're referring now right to the dream about the lady in the baking powder. Yeah. Yeah. So what is your impression of Sula's dream of the baking powder lady? And then the next part of it, right? Why did the boarded window give Sula peace and comfort? Now, to me, I'm thinking of this. So the window was boarded up, right? I believe. I'd have to go back, and I had to bring the library book back today. But I believe the window was boarded up from the inside of the house, or was it boarded up from the outside? Gosh, if Tennille, if you remember and you can tell us, if we were boarded up from the inside, I could see her giving her peace in that it was sort of symbolic of her keeping everything out, and that it was her decision to keep everything out. Boone says the dream was confusing to me. And Deb says, I think the baking powder thing was complicated for sure. Was it a racist thought? Oh, interesting. It's a racist thought. That's a very interesting take. And Neil says it's a mad, mad dream. Yes, from a crazy lady. Yeah. Yeah, the only thing I could make of it was, as Tennille, you pointed out in your video, was that like that silky feeling, right, to baking powder. And the only thing I could make of it was that as Sula was lying on her deathbed, maybe there was that feel that life was no longer something she could grab hold on. It was very, very tenuous and slippery. Boone says the boarded window I can get, thinking just her alone and no one else for sure, that she was by herself, just her and her crazy thoughts. She felt safe, peaceful, and protected and comforted that way. And Deb asks, why did she want to put the powder in her pockets? Yeah, I really, Tennille, maybe, let's see what she says. Possibly, Deb, there may be a cultural reference there that I'm not aware of. Yeah. I think you may be right. Something about putting something in a pocket, right? I'm going to look that up after. I can't think of it, but I think you may be right, Janelle. There might be something to that. And so I have now the last question we have tonight from Tennille. What does it tell you about Sula that her final thought was of Nell? So what does it tell you, what does it tell all of us about Sula that her final thought was of Nell? Well, firstly, Nell was just finished visiting her, right? So of course, Nell was the person she had last interacted with, so that might be why she was thinking of her. Nell had also been the person who was closest to ever understanding her. And maybe on some level she still desired that closeness, even though she was pushing it away with all of her might. Neil says maybe the boarded up window was a comfort because she couldn't throw herself out of it. That's an interesting idea. Okay. Or maybe the crazy thing was laying there thinking of Hannah burning and Eva jumping. Yeah, that's awful. The way she was thinking of Hannah burning. No? And we finally find out at this point, right, that she wasn't just frozen there in shock watching the whole thing, you know, develop before her eyes. No, she found it fascinating. You think it's true that she really found? I mean, I guess I always like giving people the benefit of the doubt. Do you think it's true that she really was sort of like enthralled with what was happening to her mother at that time? Or do you think well, she's thinking this now because if she says, you know what, I found it interesting, I found it thrilling, it distances her emotionally from what occurred. Could it possibly be, probably not, that she so much wanted to have her mother around with her that the only way she could handle the loss was to pretend she didn't care about it? Deb says not that she cared what Nell thought about it, though. No. No, she did not care what Nell thought, that's for sure. And Boone says, I don't think Sula gave her much thought at all. The first thing she does is send her off to get her medicine after all the time passes and after what she did. Tennille's saying habit, just sharing her thoughts with Nell because she was used to it. You know, I was wondering about that, Tennille. I was thinking the way that she was saying, right, that she wishes she could tell Nell that it didn't hurt at all. I wonder if that's not even just another spiteful, hurtful comment directed towards Nell. Because, you know, Sula thinks, or she recognizes that Nell sees herself as a good person. So if Nell sees herself as good, Sula is, right, we know that she now feels judged by Nell. So Nell must be thinking that Sula is bad. And so if there is any religious bent or conviction on Nell's part, Sula might think, oh, you know what? Nell's thinking, okay, you know what? She's dying now. She's going off to somewhere, you know, very unpleasant. She will have a painful death to suffer for all of the harm she has caused others. So I wonder if Sula thinking, you know what, Nell? It didn't even hurt, was another spiteful comment, kind of like, May, got one over on you here too. If you thought I had something bad coming to me, nope. It was easygoing, peaceful, relatively comfortable now. I don't know, what do you think? Tennille says, it's so hard to believe Sula's true nature. Oops, and Deb says, could Sula be that spiteful? I don't know, I'm wondering. I'm really wondering about that. And Boone says, yep. You know, if I can just digress for one moment over here. Actually, I knew two narcissistic people. I only mentioned one, but there was a second one. And after my godfather passed away, this was when I was still a Christian and when I was younger, his adopted daughter became my godmother. And on the day my mother was dying at home from ovarian cancer, she was already like in a coma at that point. So I had administered her morphine shot in the morning. And then my father, who had never wanted with my mother to make any funeral arrangements beforehand, asked me if I could then spend that morning and go and choose a nice plot for my mother, and so that everything would be arranged so she could be buried as quickly as possible. So I went to do that, and then on the way from leaving the cemetery, which is on the island of Montreal, and at that point my dad's house, where my mother was also, was about 20 miles away. And it was a Friday, so the weekend was coming up, and it was at the end of May, so it was beautiful summery weather. I stopped off at this godmother's house for a moment because I really wasn't feeling so great after having gone to the cemetery. I just went in to ask her, can I quickly have a cold glass of water? I had just gone to the cemetery to make arrangements, and I had to get home to take care of my mom in case she needed another morphine shot. And my godmother proceeded to talk to me, I don't know, it must have been for almost a half an hour, about all sorts of stuff. Some of it related to my mother, some of it not. And here I am. I had always been raised to be respectful of my elders and to be very kind and patient. And what I regret to this day is that I hadn't been adamant enough to put my foot down and say, this is not the priority in this moment. I'm leaving. I still made it home in time for my mother, but I tell you, the whole way home, I was stuck in traffic because it was the weekend. And I don't know, I think it took me like about 2 hours to get home, where on a good day it takes about 35 minutes, 40 minutes. It took me about 2 hours. The first thing that I did when I got home is I went to my parents' bedroom where my mom was, and I checked to make sure she was still breathing, that I hadn't missed her passing. I wasn't there to comfort her. But this was a very narcissistic person. She was just so interested in hearing what she had to say, advice she had to share, that even though she knew it was going to be my mom's last day, likely, she still kept me from going home. Neil says, excuse me, my nose is itchy. Can evil be manifest in something as as simple as selfishness? And I think when that selfishness touches others and hurts them deeply, and then people express to you that it hurts them deeply, if you do nothing to try to make amends for it or to change your ways, I think there can be, I don't know if I would use the word evil, but there can be that's definitely indicative of a very bad personality. Boone says, I think it depends on what is done with that selfishness. Yeah. Boone says, oh, that's awful, Leah. It was. And I was just too nice and naive at that point to say, okay, I'm going. But to me, that's just another example that stands out in my mind of somebody who's very narcissistic. She just wanted to hear what she had to share and impart her great advice. It couldn't wait to be discussed later on the phone when I was home or anything like that. Yeah. Neil says, I think Sula did have an evil nature untempered by conscience. Yeah, I agree with that. Deb or Lil Aussie, do you have any thoughts you want to share about that? What do you think about that? That Sula's final thoughts were of Nell. Deb says, in a way, she had a conscience. She could do no wrong. Yeah, that's true, because she was right assessing her own behavior. I hear you. Yeah. It was her definition of what was good and bad and appropriate and inappropriate that was so skewed, all in her favor. Boone says, for sure, Tennille. And Boone here is agreeing with what Tennille said when she said, I think Sula did have an evil nature untempered by any conscience. Yeah, I think that's why I'm inclined to think that her parting remark to Nell about did you ever think that I was good and you were bad, I think it was meant to be spiteful. Have the last word, to have one up on Nell. She just couldn't let it go. Yeah. Okay, so that brings us to the last question that we have for this chapter. And difficult chapter, difficult book in so many ways. Certainly not the reading. It's certainly It's very in-depth. It really develops character wonderfully. But it has so many surprises, and so many of them are very disappointing and get us thinking about real life and disappointments we've experienced or friends have experienced, right? It's difficult to read this. It's kind of like whenever we're looking for there to be like a happy turn, some happy development, something comes along to just say, no, it's not going to work out that way for these people, not in this place. Moon says an amazing story. Just wow. Yeah, I'm really glad, Tennille, that you'd have us reading this. I've certainly learned a lot. It's not typically the kind of material that I would read, so I'm really glad you've opened me up to something new. I do very much enjoy books that delve into, let's say, psychology and look at what drives people. But the flavor of this book has been different for me. But I've enjoyed it very, very much. And I can't wait to find out what we're going to cover after we're finished with Sula and with Nell. Okay, so ladies, do you have anything else that you want to share before we go? Neil says it's an exhausting book. It is, no? Yeah, like if you really take the words to heart and you imagine the situation and the circumstances and the reactions and feelings of the characters, yeah, it is. It's very emotionally tiring. Deb says it's a pretty bleak story. Sad to think that this could be the way some people's lives were like. Yeah. Yeah, there is. There's a lot of sadness in the world, no? It says, oh, I was laughing at Tennille. Deb's way, not laughing at you. So Boone was laughing at Tennille, saying that it's an exhausting book. Yeah. But like Boone says, I think it's an amazing story. And certainly gets us thinking an awful lot. Tennille says, yes, it is gritty and dirty, but so thought-provoking. Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, it's not the kind of book, right, for anybody who wants to just sit down and have an easy read, right? Like I know every summer I think they come out with a bunch of new releases, the publishing companies that they call like beach reads or beach books. Like take it with you to the beach and, have a nice relaxing afternoon reading a book, that kind of a deal. This would not qualify as one of those books. No. So, if nobody has anything else they want to share right now, it's Neil says, what in the world can follow Sula? Suggestions, anyone? I saw a book on display today at my library, but I didn't have my phone with me, so I couldn't snap a picture. And by the time I got home, I totally forgot the title. But I took a look at it. I'm going to check it on my library's reading list and see. But the title was very, very intriguing. So I'll look into it, and then I'll come up with it as a suggestion next week when we get together, if you like. But yeah, suggestions would be great from everybody. So maybe if you don't have a suggestion now, everybody can give it a thought over the week and then come back and share it, either by email to Tennille or in the comments to her videos, or you can come and share it here in the live stream, whatever works best. And Lil Elsie says, I will go back and read it again with this discussion in mind. Yeah, that's true, right? Sometimes after we discuss things with people, we then get new insight, and that gives a different feel to the book the next time we go through it. I think that's a great idea, Lil Elsie. Tina says, I hope you're enjoying it, Little. It's quite a mouthful. Yes. Boone says she's open to suggestions for what we're going to cover next, so that's great. Deb, too, if you're still listening in, if you want to think of anything you want to suggest, and or in addition to like suggesting an actual book, is there like a particular genre? Attempt to say, how do you say that in English? Genre of book that you would like to read? Like this was very. I would call this like hard, dry fiction. And does anybody have a preference for something else? Whether it's a different genre, like I don't know, if we're just doing this fiction, or if we're going to branch out into science fiction or comedy, into suspense, into historical works. I imagine we're open to discuss anything. So Moon says, this book I know I will read again just to see what else I can understand, what I may have missed. Yeah, Lil Elsie was suggesting she might do the same thing. Deb saying, I'm still here. Okay, so Deb, if you think of anything, then maybe suggest it either during the week by email to Neil, or drop it in the comments to her video on Friday, and or wait till next week. And then we'll take it from there. But yeah, so I have to finish up with Sula. See how the whole thing turns out. Deb says, I like just about any kind of book or story. That's very flexible, right? That's great. Okay. So I'll wish everybody then a wonderful week. I thank you all for joining in, and stay blessed, everybody. Oh, Danielle's suggesting a book. How about Catch 22? That sounds like a very fun book to read. I'm certainly open to covering that one for sure. So why don't we keep that on our list, and then we can cover it again after people have had a chance to think about it, unless everybody wants to agree to it now. But maybe it would be nice if we let Kate have a vote in this too. Maybe she has something she would like to suggest. I don't know, but I'm up to reading Catch 22. No, I've got to tell you, because Catch 22 reminds me of books that I read a while ago. It reminds me also of the book. Sometimes I think about Fahrenheit 451, which was a book where, if anybody here wants to read it, I won't give a spoiler. But with some of the censorship that we've seen in the last year or two going on with certain books in the library, particularly children's books, I'm speaking about Dr. Seuss books right now, that book often comes to mind. So, Lynn says, thank you, Aaliyah and Tennille, for such thoughtful questions. You were so good at it. Hey, the questions are all Tennille's. I just read them without lumbering them up too much, but here I am, I'm bumbling this too. Lassie says, bye everyone, enjoy the week ahead. Moon says, I don't even know what Catch 22 is. It's a very well known. It's a known book of fiction called Catch 22. Voon says, have a good night, little Aussie. That's very sweet. Neil says, thank you for being a gracious hostess. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for coming to book club. Thanks, everyone, for being here. I really enjoy this time with you every week. Deb says, bye, little Aussie. And I say, I'll say bye to everybody. We'll all say bye to one another. You'll see me kissing and waving. And we'll be back here, God willing, next week. Same time, same place, same me. Hopefully with some ideas for the next coming book, and or a vote to do Catch 22 as Tennille suggested. So Deb says, thanks for an enjoyable conversation. Tennille says, Fahrenheit 451 is a great book. Yeah, I really loved it. And Voon says, have a great night, everyone. A great night and a great week. Blessed week. Everybody stay safe, stay healthy. Enjoy your loved ones. Bye-bye. Good night.